Good afternoon, everyone. So, Theo asked me to come today to talk a little bit about city planning, how we do our plans, how they culminate, and help us manage different projects throughout the city. So I'm going to start with the granddaddy of them all, the city's comprehensive plan. So we recently adopted in end of 2020, actually, City Plan 2040. Got a little bit of shadow on my slides, but hopefully you can still see it. I'm not sure what the box is, but so City of Roanoke is actually pretty famous for planning. We actually created one of the earliest comprehensive plans in the country. A women's club hired John Nolan, who's a famous city planner back in the day, to do a comprehensive plan. And then we proceeded to ignore that because all the male planning commissioners decided, no, that's all right, And then they later went back and funded their own plan, which they followed to a degree. But we do have that legacy of planning in the city of Roanoke. So a comprehensive plan is important because it helps create that vision for the future. What do we want to look like in 20 years? It helps us develop the policies and actions that help us get there, that help us guide City Council every month when they make their decisions. It also provides directions for how we use our budget or our capital improvement program, how we fund projects, and how we develop regulations. So, persistence pays. So I mentioned some of the early planning that we had done at the city. So in 1907, John Nolan created that plan on your far left, that shows this green ribbon ring around the city, sort of an emerald necklace idea that you would connect all the parks with trails and everything. And then, as I mentioned, we sort of did another plan in 1928, which kind of had some of that, but then by 64 we had dropped that altogether. And so it was really only in 2001 that we got back to this idea of, hey, let's have a greenway system, and it's all connected, right? Which is now, if you look at that map, it actually looks very similar to some of our Roanoke River Greenway, Tinker Creek Greenways that we have now. So sometimes it takes a while to achieve the vision. But traditionally, a comprehensive plan focuses on land use issues, housing, economic policy, economic development, the roads, the infrastructure that helps you do all that, and some of the public facilities, the fire stations, the police departments. But this time around, when we started really what was 2018, we knew we wanted some new areas of focus. We knew that community health was sort of a growing trend in the planning world, and how we connect that to land use, where people live affects people's health. And then we also knew we wanted to focus on equity, because we in the planning department had tried to put some of those elements in our plans over time and just really hadn't been successful. So we really wanted to get it done in this. And so it just so happened about the same time, the National American Planning Association organization, they put out best practices for comprehensive plans, and we borrowed from them the 6 themes that we actually used for our comprehensive plan, because they included not only those initial elements that I talked about, which are sort of bread and butter of comprehensive plans, but they also talked about healthy communities and interwoven equity. In fact, interwoven equity really became the driving force of our comprehensive plan, City Plan 2040. So as we went through that process, and I'll try to go through this quick, we had a lot of input. We had over 2.5 years of input from folks. We did surveys, we had mapping tools, we had rounds of public meetings, rounds of public meetings to really ask people what was important to them with the city. What were the things that they liked most about the city? What did they think the challenges were? And what did they want to see happen in the future of the city? And again, we had different survey questions, and I think we're a little worried on time, so I won't go into it. But we heard about things like community being very important, diversity, equity, but also housing, transit, and the surrounding environment. We had different working groups that help us focus on those individual themes. So we met monthly with small groups to really get into what should be our policies and actions. And then we came back and had another round of meetings. And then we had a big focus on equity. And because that was such big part of our comprehensive plan, and also a much bigger discussion within the community. We started scheduling separate meetings just to have the equity discussions. And so those were really powerful. We had ended up 3 or 4 of those specifically about equity. And so I'll talk a little bit about what is equity. Anyways, I'll give you the short version. We looked at a lot of different definitions, and I really like kind of this one just up front. Fairness that reaches beyond equal treatment. So the biggest problem we have when we talk about equity is everyone wants to talk about, well, is it equal? Well, and that's what we're saying with equity. No, it may not be equal, but we're helping people the way they need to be helped, right? Or we're assisting them in the assistance they need. And the best graphic we found for this, I think, is this one. On the top picture here, you have equality, where you have 4 very different individuals, from children to a tall man to a regular-sized woman, I guess, to a person in a wheelchair, and they all get a bike, standard-sized bike, and that suits about one of them, it looks like. But if we focus on equity, we would help people get the bike that is appropriate for them, that helps them reach their goals. So that all culminated with our City Plan 2040, which is available on our Plan Roanoke website. From that, as soon as actually before we even adopted that plan, City Council turned around. Matter of fact, I presented an early draft of the plan, and I mentioned one of our recommendations was an Equity Empowerment Advisory Board. And we'll be back to you with the plan later in December. And they're like, well, wait a minute, can we do that now? And I said, well, absolutely. Start it now, please. And so they started, even before we passed the comprehensive plan, they already started an Equity and Empowerment Advisory Board, which is still ongoing as they try to reach their goals. And then some other things that we've done since the adoption of the comprehensive plan are some of the zoning text ordinances that we've made. We did some initially right out the gate. We allowed accessory of dwelling units by right in all the residential properties. So anywhere in the city, you can build an accessory dwelling unit as long as it meets certain criteria. We recently went back and changed that even more, where we started opening up different types of what we call missing middle housing throughout our residential zones in our city. So you're more able to do duplexes and triplexes and some of the type housing we used to do before we lost our minds and forgot to do that sort of stuff. So if you go to Raleigh Court, you see great examples of courtyard apartments, smaller apartment buildings, duplexes, triplexes, and they really serve our community and helped create the beautiful neighborhood center that we have over in Grandin Village by putting that number of rooftops around there. And then we stopped doing that, and we decided we didn't want any more of that in our backyard. And so what we've done recently is open that up so people can do some of that again. We've also done some other things to help support EV charging stations and solar power. And then we also did some work on parking, where we got rid of minimum parking requirements, so we stopped ending up with giant parking lots that no one uses half the time. We're letting the market drive that. What we found is that developers will build the parking that they need for that development, and we don't need as planners to try to dictate what that number should be, because we're often wrong. And so that's our attempt to sort of get rid of some of those empty parking lots that are only used on occasion. So all of that culminates in the city's comprehensive plan. Those were some of the initial things that we did out the gate. Now as we move forward, I don't know if I can get rid of that box on there or not. I may not be able to, but it's a little shady. We'll stay in the shade. It'll keep us cooler. But hopefully you can still read it. But when we think about our comprehensive plan, it itself is really 3 different volumes, right? So the City Plan 2040 is volume 1. That's our general plan, our comprehensive plan. But all the subsequent plans we do get amended as part of the comprehensive plan. And so we think about the comprehensive plan as one big document that has 2 extra volumes on there. So I'm going to talk about those. Maybe we can see it a little better. So I've already talked about the comprehensive plan, so I won't go too much there. That is the comprehensive plan. But then we have certain topics, focus plans. So we have, underneath that, we've since created an economic development plan. We've drafted a housing strategy to help us deal with creating more affordable housing in the city. We know we're going to, pretty soon, Doug will talk a little bit about creating an update to the arts and culture plan. Parks and Rec does a plan every 5 years. These are all specific topic plans that also get adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. And then we have our place-focused plans, which include neighborhood plans and place-based strategy plans. So neighborhood plans are really our bread and butter. The city has 26 neighborhood plans in existence now, but I think the newest one is maybe like 15 years old. So they're all very dated now. Most of them are over 20 years old. And so our goal really in the next 5 years is to start updating all of those neighborhood plans. They're still very good and helpful at times, but I think they are all due for an update. And what we want to do is use all those other plans to this point. So the comprehensive plan, arts and culture plan, economic development plan, housing plan. We also did a plan focused on neighborhood centers in different parts in our community. We want to be able to use all those elements to help us do the updates to these neighborhood plans and have these discussions at that smaller level where we really get into looking at different parcels and pieces of a neighborhood, corridors. The other piece are sort of place-based strategies. So we may do a corridor plan. The city focuses their community development dollars in target areas, and we often do a neighborhood revitalization strategy in those areas. So a specifically focused area where we're targeting resources. So that's part of it too. And I mentioned recently we did a focus on neighborhood centers in our community. So I dropped Grandin Village out there earlier. You're familiar probably if you live in Roanoke with neighborhood centers because we do have Grandin Village. We have Wasina's Main Street. We have Crystal Springs. Well, we also have a lot of other areas that have that structure to them but maybe haven't been revitalized yet. And so you have 11th Street where you have some things happening and a lot of potential for more things to happen. And then you have other parts of our community the same way. So we did a plan to sort of focus on how do we look at those neighborhood centers and invest in them so that we can get the type of investment we've seen at some of those other neighborhood centers. So that's really the structure of how all those fit together. So I went through that really fast, so please we can come back to questions if you need to. But I wanted to talk quickly about why plan, because I think one of the biggest questions I have, and maybe this isn't really the right question, the question I often get is why did we plan if none of this is going to happen, right? Like you paint this beautiful picture of all these things the community wants, and then only half of it happens. And that's unfortunately often true. So, I mean, we will do big plans, and they will not all happen because we need to do the plan because we have to get in front of it, right? So we don't know when that development proposal will come in. But if we have an area, a neighborhood, parcel that does not have a plan, then a developer can come in and they will drive the discussion on developing that property. So if we want these things to happen, we have to think about them in advance. And it is true, they won't all happen. Now, what a plan does do is it allows us to focus our city budget. So there are some things that a city will pay for. The city will often do infrastructure improvements, streetscape improvements, maybe help put bus shelters in, support transit, that sort of thing. But there's a lot of things that a city will not pay for. We're not often going to build commercial development. You know, we're not going to put an office building and employ 500 people, or very rarely, unless it's like a city building. And so we need the plan in place to encourage that investment, to let people know this is the type of development that the community wants to have happen here, and also to be prepared for it so we can leverage that plan when that development comes in. I think this is probably one of the most misunderstood pieces of my profession, honestly, is I think we often create plans and we have to think big, right? We have to have a big vision and think about if we could have everything we wanted, what would it be? What would it look like? But, you know, it's probably true that it won't all happen 100%. So, but what we do is once that plan is in place, it helps guide it, right? So we can shape what does happen to meet what we need to have happen. All right. So with that downer, I'll open it up for questions. So I think I introduced myself at the beginning, or Theo did, but I'm Wayne Leftwich. I'm planning manager at the city. I've been here for about 9 years, I think. You can scan that and get all my contact information. We're going to transition to Doug because as we start thinking about our neighborhood plans and how different plans like the heat resiliency plan might help us do those neighborhood plans, another really key component to that work will be some of the arts and culture work that Doug is doing and how that ties into doing our neighborhood plans. Got a question?
Wayne, I have a quick question. What is an accessory dwelling unit?
Yes, good question. So that would be a small, like if you've ever heard of a carriage house, like a garage size structure that's in your backyard, or mother-in-law apartment's another way to think about it. But a small structure about the size of a garage in your rear or side yard. It is limited in square footage, so we do have supplemental regulations for it. So it's typically not going to be any larger than 800 square feet. That would be a maximum entire living space. And we like them, and they're really supported this day and age by all sorts of groups, even AARP, because they create a smaller unit that often, because of its size, maintains a sense of affordability. You know, it's not necessarily affordable. I could put one in my backyard, charge whatever the rent I want for it, but because it is smaller, it tends to be more affordable. And it also creates that kind of unit that we really have a need for right now, which is a small, single bedroom unit. So we have a really large need in this community for one bedroom places to live. And that's in some ways because we're aging. Sometimes if you're aging in place, you might find yourself only needing a one bedroom. You want a smaller place to live. It's also true because we have a lot of people that live individually and want a cheaper place to live in. So that's an accessory dwelling unit. We used to call them accessory apartments. Now we call them accessory dwelling units because that's what they're really known nationally, if you will.
Can you go on to the Roanoke planning site and see what the plan is that you all have for the next 20 years?
Absolutely. So planroanoke.org is where we have our city plan 2040. And so you can go in there and you could spend a whole day playing around with that. We even have nice videos that introduce each theme and section. We also list all our current neighborhood plans. I did notice today we don't have our neighborhood center plans on there, so we need to put that up there. That's a miss. That's on our economic development site right now. So. Go ahead, Jane.
I'm just curious, after changing that zoning for the accessory dwelling,
Yes.
have you had many
applications? So we haven't had many, but we have had some. And we're trying to improve that. So we first did the accessory dwelling unit thing about a year ago. Maybe it was a year and a couple months now. And since we've mainly had new construction, so someone says, hey, wait a minute, I can build a single family house and I can put an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, that's pretty cool. Like, that's a cool market. And so we've had some of that occur. We've had a lot of conversations with people about doing it in their own yard, and I know that we've had at least a couple that have been built in the back of, like, what you would say typical homeowner's house. And then we recently did a competition. We received grant dollars from AARP, and we worked with the Blue Ridge AIA, the local architects group, and we had a design competition for accessory dwelling units. And we got something like 25 different entries. We had 4 winners, and with the grant money, we gave it as prize money so that those 4 winners would take their designs and actually put them through the building permit process, so to actually create building plans that we now have available for free for residential folks, for non-commercial uses, for people to use those plans to build an accessory dwelling unit in your own backyard. So they've already been approved through building codes. Now, of course, you still got to site it on your property and get through that process, but we're hoping that encourages people to start looking into building that on their own property. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it over to Doug.